Hey guys, it's me, Sarin, back with another video. We are on day 3 of Black Her Story Month, so let's go ahead and jump right in. This one I'm sure is going to please a lot of you guys. Today's hidden figure is the godmother of rock and roll herself, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. A lot of you guys requested that I do a video on Sister Rosetta Tharpe, again also known as the godmother of rock and roll. So let's go ahead and dive right into some information on Sister Rosetta Tharpe. For any of you that do not know, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, born March 20th, 1915, died October 9th, 1973, was an American singer, songwriter, guitarist, and recording artist. A pioneer of mid-20th century music, she gained popularity in the 1930s and 40s with her gospel recordings, characterized by a unique mixture of spiritual lyrics and rhythmic accompaniment that was a precursor to rock and roll. She was the first, number one, great recording star of gospel music and among the first gospel musicians to appeal to rhythm and blues and rock and roll audiences, later being referred to as the original soul sister and the godmother of rock and roll. She influenced early rock and roll musicians including Little Richard, Johnny Cash, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, and Jerry Lee Lewis. So all these people that you hear called the fathers of rock and roll and the godfathers of rock and roll and the pioneers of rock and roll and the inventors of rock and roll, who were they influenced by? This fucking black woman, okay? Because black women do everything. Let's continue. Willing to cross the line between sacred and secular by performing her music of light in the darkness of nightclubs and concert halls, Tharpe pushed spiritual music into the mainstream and helped pioneer the rise of pop gospel, like Mary Mary and Kirk Franklin and all that shit. Beginning with her 1939 hit This Train, her unique music left a lasting mark on more conventional gospel artists. While she offended some conservative churchgoers with her forays into the pop world, she never left gospel music. Tharpe's 1944 hit Down by the Riverside was selected for the National Recording Registry of the U.S. Library of Congress in 2004, which noted that it captures her spirited guitar playing and unique vocal style, demonstrating clearly her influence on early rhythm and blues and her influence on many gospel, jazz, and rock artists. Her 1945 hit Strange Things Happening Every Day, recorded in late 1944, featured Tharpe's vocals and electric guitar with piano, bass, and drums. It was the first, yet another first for this woman. It was the first gospel record to cross over, hitting number 2 on the Billboard Race Records chart, the term then used for what later became the R&B chart. So the R&B chart was literally the race record chart, okay? So when you guys hear me talk about what is urban contemporary as a genre at the Grammys, this is the shit that we're talking about. Like separate genres very deliberately created to put black people in these categories, right? To separate us from everyone else. When we're the one that created all these genres, putting us in our own category so that everybody else can fucking run through our shit. Meanwhile, we're put in a race records chart. We're put in an urban contemporary category, right? It was the first gospel record to cross over, hitting number 2 on the Billboard Race Records chart, the term then used for what later became the R&B chart in April 1945. The recording of Strange Things Happening Every Day has been cited as a precursor of rock and roll. So here's this woman that grew up singing this gospel music and became the first, number 1 hit gospel, well, I guess number 2 on the Billboard chart, hit gospel, star. She crossed over into kind of, this mainstream because she played this gospel music in bars and in nightclubs, and she played with this electric guitar, and she was just like, she created rock and roll. Like, she created rock and roll. She was like, I'm gonna shred this guitar, I'm gonna sing the shit out of these records, and I'm gonna fucking birth this shit, basically, right? Like, and I'm gonna birth this shit. And does she get her fucking just due? No. Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, give Sister Rosetta Tharpe her due. Let's continue. Let's keep the ball rolling. Sister Rosetta Tharpe was born Rosetta Newbin on March 20th, 1915 in Cotton Plant, Arkansas. Cotton Plant. Let that sink in. Although the identity of her father is unknown, Tharpe's mother, Katie Bell Newbin, was a singer, mandolin player, and evangelist preacher for the Church of God in Christ, the COGIC, the Kojic, founded by a Black Baptist bishop, encouraged musical expression and worship, and allowed women to preach. At the encouragement of her mother, Tharpe began singing and playing the guitar from a very young age and was by all accounts a musical prodigy. She began performing on stage with her mother from the age of 4, playing the guitar and singing Jesus is on the Main Line. By age 6, she had joined her mother as a regular performer, and she was billed as a singing and guitar playing miracle. She accompanied her mother in hybrid performances, part sermon, part gospel concert, before audiences all across the American South. In the mid-1920s, Tharpe and her mother settled in Chicago, Illinois, where the duo continued to perform while occasionally traveling to perform at church conventions throughout the country. As a result, Tharpe developed considerable fame as a musical prodigy, standing out in an era when prominent Black female guitarists remained very rare. In 1934, at the age of 19, Rosetta Tharpe married a preacher named Thomas Thorpe. Although the marriage only lasted a short time, she decided to incorporate a version of her first husband's surname into her stage name, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, which she would use for the rest of her career, which is where that name came from. In 1938, Tharpe moved to New York City, where she signed with Decca Records. On October 31st of that year, she recorded 4 songs for Decca: Rock Me, That's All, The Man and I, and The Lonesome Road. The first gospel songs ever recorded for Decca, all 4 of these recordings became instant hits, establishing Tharpe as one of the nation's first commercially successful gospel singers. Then, on December 23rd, 1938, Tharpe performed in John Hammond's famous Spirituals to Swing concert at Carnegie Hall. Her performance was controversial and revolutionary in several aspects. She performed gospel music in front of secular audiences and alongside blues and jazz musicians, which was highly unusual. Musically, Tharpe's unique guitar style blended melody-driven urban blues with traditional folk arrangements and incorporated a pulsating swing sound that is one of the first clear precursors of rock and roll. The performance shocked and awed the Carnegie Hall audience. Later, Tharpe gained even more notoriety by performing regularly with jazz legend Cab Calloway at Harlem's famous Cotton Club, right? So she built this shit. She built this rock and roll shit. Sister Rosetta Tharpe built all this rock and roll shit. Like, I don't want to hear it. Hidden figure, right? Hidden figure. This is someone that we should be learning about, you know, when we learn about rock and roll, when we learn about music. But then, yet again, Black people created every single genre in this country, and we never get our just due. You know, they call Elvis the king of rock and roll. Man, fuck that. Like, we created that shit, and a Black woman specifically created that shit, right? And then you have, like, Chuck Berry, who fine-tuned, you know, you have all these people that Elvis Presley was influenced by and inspired by, but since he was the first white boy that came along and did it, they made him, oh, and he's the king of rock and roll. It's absurd. It's ridiculous, right? So I'm going to read you guys a few quotes about Rosetta Tharpe before I read a final quote from her that I think you guys, well, you know what, actually, I'm going to read her quote first. I just changed my mind. And then I'm going to read the follow-up quotes. So Sister Rosetta Tharpe said, "All this new stuff that they call rock and roll, well, I've been playing that for years now. 90% of rock and roll artists came out of the church. Their foundation is the church." Sister Rosetta Tharpe in an interview with the Daily Mirror in 1957. I read a quote that said something like, you know, a lot of people tried to make gospel music secular. Sister Rosetta Tharpe did the opposite. She made rock and roll music holy, you know, like this is something divine. You know, we're having this divine communion of getting together for this music, you know, which is just a really, really, really interesting thing to kind of think about. So the quotes that I want to read you guys, and then I'm going to go ahead and go. She had a major impact on artists like Elvis Presley. Her biographer, Gail Wald, told a documentary film crew, "When you see Elvis Presley singing songs early in his career, I think you should imagine that he is channeling Rosetta Tharpe. It's not an image that I think we're used to thinking of in rock and roll history. We don't think about the black woman behind the young white man. She did incredible picking. That's what attracted Elvis to her, said Gordon Stoker, who led Elvis's backing band. He liked her singing too, but he liked her picking first because it was so different. She would get this guitar pick and she would just shred. She would just shred the shit out of her fucking guitar in a way that literally no one had ever seen before, right? Like something that no one had ever seen before. She felt it. She felt it and it just had to come out, right? So I'm going to read one more quote. The Guardian said of Sister Rosetta Tharpe's inspired and awe-inspiring talent, nobody, not Chuck Berry, not Scotty Moore, Elvis Presley's famed guitarist, not James Burton, not Keith Richards, nobody played wilder or more primal rock and roll guitar than this woman who gave her life to God and would have celebrated her 100th birthday on the 20th of March. With the Gibson SG in her hands, Sister Rosetta could raise the dead, and that was before she started to sing. Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Johnny Cash, Isaac Hayes, and Aretha Franklin all said that Sister Rosetta Tharpe had a heavy influence on their music. The woman had some serious chops. Jerry Lee Lewis even famously said, I said, say man, there's a woman who can sing some rock and roll. I mean, she's singing religious music, but she is singing rock and roll. She's shaking, man. She jumps it. She's hitting that guitar, playing that guitar, and she is singing. I said, woo! Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Hidden figures. Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the godmother of rock and roll. And if you don't know, now you know. Tons of links in the description box. Food for thought as always. See you guys tomorrow. Peace.